Number 1. The Bruniquel Cave Rings. 336 meters inside a French hillside in a blackness that has never known a single ray of sun, someone is kneeling in the dark. A small fire burns beside them, and by its orange light they snap a stalagmite from the cave floor and set it into a growing ring of broken stone. This is not a modern human. Anatomically, modern people will not reach Europe for more than 100,000 years. This is a Neanderthal, working deep underground, building something we still cannot name. The cave sits in Bruniquel, in the Tarn-et-Garonne region of southwest France. It was rediscovered in 1990 when a teenager named Bruno Kowalczewski spent months clearing a rubble-choked passage his father had noticed air flowing through. Far beyond the entrance, past hundreds of meters of dark tunnel, explorers found 2 roughly ring-shaped structures on the cave floor, along with 4 smaller heaps. All of them were built from deliberately broken pieces of stalagmite. Researchers call these pieces speleophax. The numbers are staggering for their age. The builders used about 400 stalagmite segments, with a combined length near 112 meters and a total mass around 2.2 metric tons. The larger ring measures roughly 6.7 by 4.5 meters. Every piece was chosen, snapped to a similar length, and placed. For years, no one could date the site properly. Early radiocarbon attempts simply maxed out, returning ages older than 47,000 years, which was the ceiling of the method. The mystery stalled for 2 decades. Then, in 2016, a team led by Jacques Jobert of the University of Bordeaux and Sophie Verheiden of the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences tried a different clock. They used uranium series dating on the thin films of fresh calcite that had grown over the broken stalagmites after they were arranged. The regrowth gave them a minimum age, and the results stunned the field. The structures are about 176,500 years old. At that date, there were no modern humans anywhere near Europe. The only people here were Neanderthals. That makes these rings among the oldest known constructions built by any member of the human family, and by far the oldest evidence of anyone venturing deep into a cave. There is fire here too. Investigators found blackened and reddened stalagmite pieces and burnt bone, and later mapped at least 18 separate zones of heating within the structures. The fires were almost certainly for light because there is no other way to work this far from the entrance. That is the quiet detail that changes everything. To reach this chamber, a person needed a controlled, portable source of fire, the confidence to carry it into total darkness, and a reason to go. Not shelter from weather, which the entrance would have provided, something else. Proposed explanations range from ritual to a gathering place to a refuge, but there is no consensus, and no art, no burials, and no everyday debris were left behind to help. For a long time, Neanderthals were dismissed as brutish and limited. Bruniquel argues the opposite. It shows planning, coordination, and the will to shape the deep earth into a form that meant something. The mastery of the underground, once thought to belong only to us and only recently, suddenly reaches back more than 100,000 years before our kind arrived. The cave is now sealed to protect it, and the purpose of the rings remains completely unknown. Number 2. The Klerksdorp Spheres. A miner drives his tool into soft, pale rock in a South African quarry. The stone flakes away, and something round tumbles loose into his palm. It is dark, dense, and wrapped with grooves so straight they look machined. He is holding an object from rock nearly 3 billion years old, and for the next 50 years people will argue about whether nature or a maker put those lines there. The spheres come from pyrophyllite deposits near Ottosdal, in the northwest province of South Africa, worked by a company called Wonderstone. The host rock is Precambrian, dated to roughly 2.8 to 3 billion years old, which places it among the most ancient sequences on the planet. The objects themselves are small, usually between 1 and 10 centimeters across, and they range from nearly perfect spheres to flattened discs. Their color runs from reddish-brown to near black, and when one is broken open, it can show a fibrous, radiating internal structure. The controversy lives in the grooves. Many of the spheres carry up to 3 roughly parallel ridges circling the equator, and to some observers that regularity looks impossible for nature. Writers in the out-of-a-place artifact tradition seized on them, claiming the lines were too precise to be accidental. A widely repeated story holds that one sphere in the Klerksdorp Museum slowly turns on its own inside a display case, though this is attributed to nothing stranger than passing vibration from the building. Here is where the account splits, and it is worth slowing down, because this is one of the few claims on this list that a laboratory can actually test. Geologists who examine the spheres, including Bruce Cairncross of the University of Johannesburg, identify them as natural concretions, built from minerals such as hematite together with wollastonite or pyrite. The parallel grooves in this reading simply record fine layering in the original sediment that the concretion grew inside. Geologist Paul Heinrich has documented the natural formation in detail and dismantled the manufactured object claims. The other claims fall apart under scrutiny. The famous line that the spheres are harder than steel and cannot be scratched does not survive testing, because hematite sits only around 5 to 6 on the Mohs hardness scale. No tool marks have been found, no internal machined parts, no metallurgical signature of fabrication, and crucially, no life existed 2.8 billion years ago that could manufacture anything at all. Similar grooved concretions turn up elsewhere in the world, which removes the idea that these are unique. So what is left is a smaller, genuinely scientific puzzle. The near-perfect spherical symmetry and the crisp equatorial grooves are not trivial to reproduce, and the exact sequence of chemical conditions that produce them is still worth study. That is the honest mystery here. Not a lost civilization polishing steel balls in the dawn of the earth, but the quiet strangeness of deep-time chemistry, which can shape stone into forms so regular that human eyes insist a mind must have made them. The Klerksdorp Spheres endure in popular imagination because the true answer, that mineral water and time can mimic a machine shop, is somehow harder to accept than the impossible one. Number 3. The Baigong Pipes. At the foot of a barren mountain in the western China, beside a flat and lifeless salt lake, there is a cave, and running through the rock above it are dozens of rusted tubes. They look exactly like plumbing. Some run straight down into the sandstone, some run flat through it, and they emerge along the shoreline like the bones of a machine that should not exist in a place with no history of machines. This is Mount Baigong, in the Kaidam Basin near the city of Dalinga, in Qinghai Province, beside Tosen Lake. The pipes vary from a few millimeters to about 40 centimeters across. In 2002, the Chinese state news agency Xinhua reported on the site and floated a spectacular idea that the tubes might be the work of an ancient or even extraterrestrial civilization. Early analyses described a mixture heavy in iron oxide with silica and calcium oxide, and about 8% of material that the first reports could not identify. That single unidentified fraction became the seed of a legend, and the site was soon marketed to tourists as evidence of lost technology or alien visitors. The scientific picture is quieter and, in its own way, stranger. Chinese geologists studying the region propose natural mechanisms, and the leading explanation is that the pipes are fossilized tree roots or plant casts, later mineralized by iron-rich groundwater. A study reported in 2003 found plant matter and even tree ring-like structures preserved in some samples, exactly what you would expect if roots had been slowly replaced by iron minerals seeping through the sandstone. That fits the deep history of the basin. The Kaidam region was far wetter in the geological past than the salt desert we see today, wet enough to support vegetation whose roots could later be entombed and turned to stone. There's a second natural route to the same result, in which iron-rich minerals precipitate into pipe-like shapes around channels left by decaying organic matter. Either way, the rusty red color is simply iron oxidation, the same chemistry that stains any iron-bearing rock exposed to water. Now consider what is missing. There are no seams, no threading, no welds, and no alloys that would point to human metallurgy. The surrounding sandstone is Cenozoic, and there was no human industry anywhere near this region at that depth of time. The famous 8% of unidentified material was never rigorously characterized, and an unmeasured fraction is not the same thing as an alien one. The reason the Baigong Pipes still haunt the internet is that they are so convincing to the eye. Diagenesis, the slow chemical reworking of buried sediment, can forge structures that look manufactured down to the last detail, tubes with walls and bores and rusted surfaces, produced with no plumber and no forge. That is the real lesson. Iron chemistry and time can build a pipe with no one to lay it. No peer-reviewed work supports an artificial origin, yet the mountain is still sold under the alien banner, because the natural answer, once again, is the harder story to believe. Number 4. The Longyou Caves. In 1992, villagers in eastern China set pumps into a pond they had always believed was bottomless, hoping to reach the bottom at last. As the water level fell day after day, it did not reveal mud, it revealed a ceiling. Then walls carved and chiseled, dropping away into an enormous man-made chamber that no living person had ever entered. And it was not alone. The site sits near Xianbekun village in Longyou County, Zhejiang province. At least 24 separate caverns have now been identified, each cut into soft siltstone and sandstone. The scale is hard to absorb. The largest chambers rise around 30 meters in height, with floor areas reaching up to 1,000 square meters each. Across all the known caves, workers removed hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of solid rock by hand. Every surface tells the same strange story. The walls, ceilings, and pillars are covered in evenly spaced parallel chisel marks, a consistent pattern repeated across chamber after chamber as if a single design governed the entire complex. The caves contain deliberately shaped support pillars, some arranged in a repeating conical form, which points to real engineering knowledge rather than random digging. And here's the part that turns an impressive quarry into a genuine mystery. Not one historical text, local chronicle, or official record mentions the excavation of these caverns. A project this size would have required, by some estimates, on the order of 1,000 workers laboring for years, an undertaking impossible to hide. Yet the written history of one of the most literate civilizations on Earth says nothing about it at all. The puzzles multiply the closer you look. The caves sit right beside each other, but the builders left walls of rock between them, which means they knew precisely where each chamber ended without breaking through into the next. That implies surveying, planning, and coordination across the whole site. And then there is the question of the spoil. Hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock were carried out, and no one has conclusively located the giant heap where all of it went. Researchers from China and abroad have surveyed the caves since the 1990s, studying the tool marks for clues to the techniques used. Every honest answer has been provisional. The purpose has been guessed at as an imperial tomb, a vast quarry, a store for grain or troops, a hidden dock complex, or a palace, and none of these has been confirmed. The tomb idea struggles against the absence of soot, of carved figures, and of any grave goods. Even the date is elusive, because the act of excavation stripped away the original rock surfaces that dating methods rely on. The best estimates place the work at least 2,000 years ago, in the Qin or Han era, or possibly earlier. The soft rock now works against the caves as well, since humidity and flooding threaten those chambers still filled with water and unexcavated. What remains is a coordinated feat of engineering on a colossal scale, carried out by an organized society that left behind not a single word claiming it. 24 cathedrals of stone, cut with matching precision, and no name attached to any of them. A few are lit and open to visitors now, and standing beneath that vast carved ceiling, the silence of the record feels almost deliberate. Number 5. The Shigir Idol. In 1890, gold miners working a peat bog in the Ural Mountains of Russia pulled something impossible from the black, wet earth. It was a carved wooden figure, taller than a person, its surface covered in faces and geometric marks, and it had been lying in the peat for so long that by every reasonable expectation it should have rotted to nothing thousands of years before. Instead, it had survived, and it turned out to be the oldest wooden monument on Earth. The object is known as the Shigir Idol, named for the placer gold mine near Yekaterinburg, where it emerged. It was carved from a single beam of larch wood. When it was found, it stood about 5.3 meters tall, though pieces were lost during the Soviet era, and today it reaches about 3.4 meters. Its survival is owed entirely to the bog. The peat's anaerobic antiseptic conditions sealed the wood away from the oxygen and microbes that would normally consume it, preserving carvings that would otherwise be unimaginable from such deep time. Those carvings are the heart of the mystery. The idol is covered in zigzags, chevrons, and straight lines, and set among them are at least 8 human-like faces or masks. A 3-dimensional head crowns the top, and more faces run down the flat length of the body. Each face carries its own expression, and researchers have wondered whether they represent spirits, ancestors, or a narrative meant to be read from top to bottom. For most of the 20th century, the idol was thought to be a few thousand years old at most. That changed with the clock. Radiocarbon dating in 1997 returned an age around 9,500 years, already astonishing. Then, in 2018, a team led by Thomas Terberger of the University of Göttingen, working with Russian colleagues including Mikhail Jilin and Svetlana Savchenko, sampled the cleaner inner wood and pushed the age back further still, to roughly 12,500 years. Let that scale settle. The Shigir Idol is around twice as old as Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. It was carved in the early Holocene, just after the last ice age released its grip, by Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, and it predates the arrival of farming in the region entirely. It was made by foragers, people long assumed to be too occupied with survival for monumental art or abstract belief. That assumption is exactly what the idol overturns. Toolmark analysis suggests it was shaped with stone tools and possibly a beaver jaw implement, and the sheer complexity of its symbols implies a rich system of meaning, a mythology, or a cosmology worked out by people with no cities, no writing, and no agriculture. The stakes of that are quietly enormous. This is arguably humanity's oldest surviving attempt to record ideas in a durable form, a message set down 12,500 years ago. And no one can read it. There is no comparable early wooden monument to compare it against, no key, no parallel text, nothing to decode the faces and lines. The idol now stands in a climate-controlled case in a museum in Yekaterinburg, speaking clearly across more than 12 millennia that its makers had something profound to say, while every word of it remains locked in a language of symbols we may never recover. Number 6. The Sanxingdui Bronzes. In 1986, brickworkers digging clay in the Chinese province of Sichuan broke through into a pit, and staring up at them from the earth were faces of bronze. Enormous masks with eyes that jutted out on stalks, ears flared wide like wings, features that belonged to no art anyone recognized. The objects had been smashed, burned, and buried on purpose, and they came from a civilization that has left us no way to hear its own voice. The site is Sanxingdui, near Guanghan, close to the Yazi River. The first hints came back in 1929, when a farmer named Yan Daoqing uncovered a pit of jade, but it was the two great sacrificial pits found in 1986, and then 6 more pits excavated from 2019 onward, that revealed the full scale. Together they held thousands of artifacts in bronze, jade, gold, and ivory. They belong to the Bronze Age shoe culture, dated to roughly 1200 to 1000 BCE, contemporary with the Shang dynasty far to the east, yet stylistically alien to it. The bronzes are like nothing else in the ancient world. The famous masks carry protruding cylindrical eyes and huge ears, and one interpretation links them to Can Kong, a semi-legendary founding king of Shu who was said to have bulging eyes. There's a bronze standing figure about 2.6 meters tall with its base, the largest known bronze human statue from ancient China. There is a bronze sacred tree reconstructed to nearly 3.96 meters, hung with birds and ornaments, and read as a cosmological world tree. And there is gold, including a gold mask and gold leaf work, sophisticated metal craft that is rare among their contemporaries. The deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. The Shu left no confirmed deciphered writing, so the civilization cannot explain itself to us. Everything we say about it is inferred from the objects, and those objects were deliberately destroyed before burial, broken and burned in what looks like a ritual decommissioning, an act of ceremony rather than looting or war. Radiocarbon dating of the newer pits centers on the 12th century BCE, and lead isotope studies of the bronze are being used to trace the ore, some of it possibly from distant sources. The ivory tusks imply either herds of local elephants or long-distance trade networks reaching into a wider world, which raises the question that no one can yet answer. Why did a wealthy, organized, artistically radical civilization gather its greatest treasures, break them, and bury them, and then vanish from the record? Invasion, natural disaster, a great flood, or a purely ritual act all have been proposed, none confirmed. A nearby site called Jinsha, discovered in 2001, appears to be a successor culture, which hints that the people of Shu may have relocated rather than simply died out. The consequence reaches far beyond one pit in Sichuan. For a long time, the story of early Chinese civilization was told as a single thread running out of the Yellow River Valley. Sanxingdui forces that story open. It reveals a second, brilliant, utterly independent center of Bronze Age culture, one that reached extraordinary heights and then chose, for reasons we cannot recover, to bury its gods in the ground. Number 7. The Dogū Figurines. On an island in prehistoric Japan, a potter presses two enormous slit-like eyes into a small clay body, incises its surface with careful patterns, fires it, and then, at some point, deliberately snaps off one of its limbs. This happens across thousands of years in hundreds of settlements, the same act repeated by people who never farmed a field, and we still cannot say for certain why they did it. These figures are called dogū, and they were made during Japan's Jomon period, one of the oldest pottery-making traditions in the world, spanning roughly 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE. Thousands of dog have been recovered, especially across eastern and northern Honshu. The most iconic type is the Shikoki dog, the goggle-eyed figurine whose huge slitted eyes resemble the snow goggles worn by Arctic peoples. They tend toward exaggeration, with broad hips, patterned incised bodies, and stylized limbs, and the finest of them, like the figures known as the Jomon Venus and the Masked Goddess, are designated national treasures of Japan. Most dog appear to be female, with emphasized breasts and hips and sometimes the swell of pregnancy, which points many researchers toward fertility symbolism. But it is the breakage that turns them into a puzzle. A striking number of dog are found deliberately broken, usually at a limb or across the torso, and the consistency of that damage looks intentional rather than accidental. The leading hypothesis is that they were used in healing rituals. In this reading, a person's illness or misfortune was symbolically transferred into the figurine, which was then broken to carry the affliction away. Other ideas compete with it. The dogū may have been fertility and childbirth, talismans, effigies of goddesses or spirits, or objects tied to burial and ceremony. Unlike the later Hanwei figures of the Kofun period, whose funerary role is fairly clear, the function of the dog is simply not documented, and it remains genuinely contested. The goggle eyes, predictably, drew a more sensational claim that the figures depict ancient astronauts in spacesuits and visored helmets. Archaeologists reject it. The eyes are far more plausibly a representation of real snow goggles, or simply a stylized way of rendering wide, staring eyes, and they belong to a specific artistic tradition rather than a memory of visitors from the sky. What is not in doubt is the scale of the practice. Dogū were made across the archipelago for thousands of years, in regional styles distinct enough to mark different traditions, all sharing the same broad idea. And that is remarkable because the Jomon were largely sedentary hunter-gatherers and fishers, people who built an elaborate material and symbolic culture without ever adopting agriculture, an unusual path in human history. Radiocarbon dating and the seriation of pottery styles let archaeologists trace the figures across the long subphases of the Jomon world. The result is a belief system older than most of the civilizations we take for granted, expressed in tens of thousands of small clay bodies carried and cradled and then, again and again, deliberately broken. The act is so consistent that it feels almost like a rule, a shared understanding held across 100 generations. And because no text and no oral memory survive to explain it, that understanding is exactly what we have lost. Number 8. The Carnac Stones. Stand at dawn on the southern coast of Brittany and look east, and the field in front of you is not empty. It is filled with stone. Row upon row of standing rocks march away toward the horizon in long parallel lines, thousands of them, planted by hand into the earth before writing existed anywhere in Europe, and no one alive knows for certain why. This is Carnac, in northwestern France, and it is one of the largest megalithic complexes on the planet. More than 3,000 standing stones, called menhirs, are arranged in long parallel alignments, joined by dolmens and burial mounds. The main groups, known as Menik, Kermario, and Kerlisken, stretch across roughly 4 kilometers of countryside. The stones were raised by Neolithic peoples, with the work spanning from around 4,500 to 3,300 BCE, and recent research suggests some structures may date to around 4,600 BCE, which would place them among the earliest megaliths in all of Europe. They are older than the Great Sarsen Circle at Stonehenge. The engineering alone is a puzzle. The largest single stones weigh many tons, and the nearby Grand Menhir Brisset, now toppled and broken into pieces, once stood about 20 meters tall and is estimated to have weighed around 280 tons, raising a monolith of that mass without metal tools, without wheels, and without draft animals in some phases is a problem that still provokes debate. The rows themselves are not perfectly straight, and the stones often decrease in size as an alignment runs on. Then comes the harder question of why. One long-standing theory casts Carnac as an astronomical instrument, a vast calendar aligned to solstices and to the cycles of the moon. In the middle of the 20th century, the engineer Alexander Thom surveyed the site and argued for precise astronomical alignments encoded in the stones, though his statistical claims have been contested ever since. Other researchers see something different: processional avenues walked in ceremony, or territorial and ancestral markers laid down to claim and remember the land. A Breton legend offers its own answer that the stones are a Roman legion frozen in place by the wizard Merlin, or by Saint Corneille. Because the builders left no writing, every interpretation is drawn from arrangement and context alone. Excavations have uncovered associated burials and pottery, tying the complex firmly to funerary and ceremonial life, but that does not settle the meaning of the rows. Thousands of years of erosion, farming, and stone robbing have disturbed the original layout, which makes the alignment studies even harder to trust. What survives the uncertainty is the consistency. The rows hold a deliberate orientation, maintained across generations of builders who must have inherited and continued a shared plan. And that is the quiet weight of Carnac. Long before cities, before states, before the written word, a society organized itself to move and raise thousands of stones in careful lines across the land, a communal labor sustained over centuries. They clearly meant something profound by it. The stones are fenced and protected now, and the exact motive that drove all that effort has never been recovered. Number 9. The Sacsayhuamán Walls. Press your palm flat against one of the great stones above Cusco and try to find the seam. There's a block beside it weighing more than 100 tons, and where the two meet, the joint is so tight that you cannot slide a sheet of paper into it, or the blade of a knife. No mortar holds them. Nothing but the shaping of the stone itself, fitted with a precision that seems to mock the tools its builders are supposed to have used. This is Sacsayhuamán, a walled complex on a hill overlooking Cusco, the old Inca capital high in the Peruvian Andes at about 3,700 meters of elevation. The site is dominated by 3 tiers of massive zigzagging terrace walls, built from limestone and andesite. Some of the blocks are estimated at over 100 tons, and a few may reach between 120 and 200 tons. They are cut into irregular polygonal shapes, each one unique, and locked together so tightly that the joints have become the stuff of legend. The Inca built the complex largely in the 15th century, under rulers including Pachacuti, using a system of rotational labor called mita. Spanish chroniclers who saw it, among them Garcilaso de la Vega, described the scale as almost beyond belief and recorded that stones were quarried and dragged over great distances. Some of the andesite came from quarries such as Bruniquel, roughly 35 kilometers away, which turns the transport of these boulders into its own unsolved problem. The tight polygonal fit is not only beautiful, it is functional. In a land shaken by frequent earthquakes, the interlocking stones can shift and resettle without collapsing, letting the walls survive tremors that would topple rigid modern masonry. But how the Inca achieved joints this precise without iron tools and without the wheel is still debated. The mainstream view holds that they shaped the andesite by pounding it with harder hammer stones, fitting each block, grinding it, and fitting it again, perhaps guided by templates. Experimental archaeology has shown that stone hammers and patient abrasion really can shape andesite, though replicating the very largest joints at full scale has not been completely demonstrated. Fringe theories rush into that gap, claiming the stones were softened by a plant acid, or somehow melted, or that a lost pre-Inca civilization built the walls that the Inca merely inherited. None of these is supported by evidence. What is true is that the Inca may well have drawn on earlier Andean stoneworking traditions, such as those at Tiwanaku, refining a craft that was already ancient. There is a final loss folded into the site. After the conquest, the Spanish dismantled much of Sacsayhuamán, carting away its stones to build colonial Cusco, so the walls that remain are only a fraction of what once stood. The name is often rendered as Satisfied Falcon, and Cusco itself was laid out in the shape of a puma. With this fortress as the head, its zigzag walls read as the animal's teeth or as bolts of lightning. Engineering and symbol, fused in stone. And the core of it endures unexplained colossal weight married to jeweler's precision, achieved by a people with no iron, no wheels, and no written word. Number 10. The Nazca Lines. A small plain banks over the Peruvian desert, and for a moment the ground below is just scarred brown plain. Then the shape resolves. A hummingbird, its wings outstretched, its beak a long, clean line, drawn across the earth at a scale so vast that no one standing on the surface could ever recognize it. The people who made it never flew. They built an image for an eye they could not have, and we are still asking who they built it for. The Nazca Lines are etched into the desert plateau of southern Peru, between the towns of Nazca and Palpa. They were made chiefly by the Nazca culture, between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE, with some earlier figures belonging to the Paracas era. The collection includes long straight lines, geometric shapes such as trapezoids and spirals, and about 70 stylized figures of animals and plants. Among them, the famous hummingbird, a monkey with a coiled spiral tail, a spider, a condor, and a strange humanoid sometimes called the owl man or the astronaut. The largest figures span up to about 370 meters, and some straight lines run for kilometers. The technique was simple and astonishingly durable. The desert floor is covered in dark pebbles coated with iron oxide, and beneath them lies paler ground. The makers removed the dark stones along their intended lines, exposing the light surface underneath, drawing in negative. In almost any other environment, wind and rain would have erased the shallow marks within a generation. But the Nazca Plateau is extraordinarily arid, stable, and still, and so the lines have survived for as long as 2,000 years. Because the figures read clearly only from the air, they became a magnet for speculation once aviation revealed them in the early 20th century. The researcher Paul Kosuk, and after him Maria Ricci, who devoted decades of her life to the lines, proposed that they formed a giant astronomical calendar with the lines pointing to solstices and the risings of stars. Later statistical testing found that astronomical case surprisingly weak. A different explanation came from the anthropologist Johann Reinhard, who connected the lines to water and fertility in a desert where water is life, suggesting they were walked in rituals that prayed for rain, with straight lines leading toward water sources and sacred sites. That idea fits a telling detail. Many of the figures are drawn as a single unbroken line, a path you could walk from beginning to end without lifting your foot, which suggests they were meant to be traveled, not merely seen. As for the aliens, the notion popularized by Erich von Däniken that the lines are runways for spacecraft is firmly rejected, and it always ran aground on the same fact. The lines predate flight, so their makers designed them from the ground, using stakes, cords, and scaled grids to project small drawings up to enormous size. The story is not finished. In the 2010s and 2020s, surveys aided by artificial intelligence led by researchers such as Masato Sakai of Yamagata University have found hundreds of new, smaller geoglyphs across the plateau. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage listing, and it is under real threat from flooding and human encroachment. The deepest mystery is not how the lines were made, but why. Why generations of people poured their labor into images they themselves could never see whole, drawn for a perspective that would not exist for another 1,000 years. Set these 10 side by side and a pattern begins to surface. They're not all the same kind of mystery. Some, like the Bruniquel rings, the Longyou Caves, the Shigir Idol, the Sanxingdui Bronzes, the Dogū, Carnac, and Nazca, are genuine unknowns, real human works whose purpose we simply cannot recover. Others, like the Klerksdorp Spheres and the Baigong Pipes, are natural objects that human eyes insisted on reading as artifacts, because deep-time chemistry can mimic a maker with unsettling skill. Across the real ones runs a single recurring gap. There is no writing, no text survives to tell us what the builders intended, so intent has to be reconstructed from arrangement, material, and context alone. And again, the effort we uncover is wildly out of proportion to any obvious need for survival. rings built in total darkness, stones raised across kilometers, images drawn for a view from the sky. These are the fingerprints of meaning, of ritual, and belief, not just utility. There is a second, humbling pattern. Every one of these sites argues that people we once dismissed as primitive were nothing of the kind. Neanderthals mastered the deep cave. Forgers carved monuments and worked out cosmologies. Bronze Age cities we never knew existed produced art of staggering originality. Our capability, it turns out, keeps proving older and deeper than we assumed. It is worth noticing how science actually narrows these puzzles, because it does. Uranium series dating fixed the age of Bruniquel. Radiocarbon and better sampling reset the Shigir Idol. Isotope analysis traces Sanxingdui's metal, and artificial intelligence is still finding new lines at Nazca. Each new tool reopens an old case. And this is exactly why fringe explanations spread so easily, because the honest scientific answer, we do not know yet, is far less thrilling than a lost race or a visitor from the stars. But that honest answer is not a failure. It is the edge of knowledge, drawn clearly on the map. These unsolved sites are not embarrassments to be explained away. They are engines of discovery. Each one sits patiently in the ground or the museum case, waiting for the next generation's instruments, the next refinement of dating, the next survey from the air to ask it a question it can finally answer. What we cannot explain marks the precise boundary of what we know. And that boundary is where every real discovery is made. There is something almost tender in it, too. The people who snapped those stalagmites, carved that larchwood, and swept the desert clean into the shape of a bird could never have imagined us looking back at them across the deep past. They were not speaking to us. And yet they reach us anyway, through the accidents of peat and drought and buried pits, holding out questions we have not stopped trying to answer. If the deep past still has questions for you, there's another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.